Welcome to the Millennial Rant, a podcast about whatever's bothering me today. With topics ranging from politics to pop culture, there's a rant to cover everyone. For more Millennial Rant content, you can join me on the web at millennialrant.com. I cannot remember if I've mentioned this before, but a lot of people live in this house in which I live, and it is because of that a lot of the stuff that happens in the house ends up being privy to like this family council style tribal system. And fairly recently, we had some water damage that leaked through the kitchen into the first basement, because we have two. Sort of everything in Branson is built on a hill, so it's like you build in layers. But anyway, so it leaked through the ceiling and into the playroom, and it wrecked the carpet, it wrecked the ceiling obviously, and it did a bunch of damage otherwise. And around the same time that was happening, the hose on our washing machine broke and like sprayed water everywhere in the laundry room, and it went into the downstairs bathroom, and we had to rip up all of the tile off the floor and retile everything. And we have to replace the washer. All of that to say, we have to replace the washer. And so we were talking about different washers and plans and what we could potentially do. And my brother Zachary owns a house in the area that he is planning on, he's been renting and now he's planning to sell. And he said that there's a washer and a dryer in there and he would be willing to donate it. And my mom was like, no, don't want your washer because it's a front loader. It stinks. It's the maintenance is difficult. And my sister-in-law is like, yeah, you have to do this for them and that for them. And it's just not worth it. So Zachary, who was trying to be benevolent, gets all upset and offended because everybody's shooting down his suggestion. And he's like, y'all with your first world problems, me over here being willing to help you out and whatever. And up until this point, I'd been largely neutral. I really don't care. I like the aesthetic of front-loading washers and all that jazz, but I really don't care what washer we get as long as we have a washer. But I draw the line at this, okay? I hate it. Hate it when people call other people out for their first world problems. We live in the first world. Those are the only kinds of problems that we have. In the middle class, the upper class, even a lot of the lower class, there is very relatively little abject poverty in the United States. I mean, it exists. It's terrible. There's no reason why we shouldn't be able to address it. But that's like the bottom 1%. People are always talking about, the upper 1%. But what about the bottom 1%? There is very little true struggle in America. The first world problems of trying to figure out what sort of washer we want and deciding whether we want to buy a new one because we don't want the front loader that's free. I mean, yes, that is a first world problem, but it's still a problem and it still needs to be solved. And trying to undermine the issues that people are having by saying, oh, you all in your first world problems. Yes. Because we live in the first world. That's where we're at. We have so few problems, actual life-threatening problems in our country that we have to, genuinely debate over whether or not we're going to take a free washer or go buy a new one. Okay? But that doesn't make it less of a problem that needs to be addressed and solved. So, it's just all the time. I get this. I hate it. It's so condescending. It's so just rude. When I was in my master's program, I bought one of those little iPads, an iPad mini, and I got a keyboard for it off of Amazon. And I wanted one of the ones that like spun all the way around and was like super fancy and whatever. But when I got the keyboard, because the one that I originally bought didn't have that, spinny capacity. If I wanted to use it as a tablet, I had to take it out of the case. And so I bought a new one that did have the spinny capacity, but the keyboard was weird. Like I couldn't type on it the way that I normally would. I'm a fairly fast typer. Last time I clocked myself, it was 74 words per minute. And so having a keyboard that's not configured properly substantially slows me down. And the whole reason I got a keyboard was so that I could do my work portably. And anyway, I'm going off on a tangent in that direction, but I was talking to one of my classmates who had asked me about the tablet. I didn't just like start volunteering my sob story about it. And so I was explaining to her about the keyboards and how I was switching it out and whatever, and she goes, "That's such a first world problem. If you don't want to talk about it, just change the subject. You don't have to be rude." What? That So, I mean, yes. Okay. I'm getting worked up. I'm getting worked up just thinking about it. Because I really I'm genuinely annoyed when people point out the fact that the problems that I'm having are not the problems that people who live in abject poverty in third world countries are having. Well, obviously, because I don't live in a third world country. And I'm not saying that their problems aren't real problems. Their problems are definitely more real problems than the problems that I have if they were, quantifying things. But it doesn't change the fact that it's still a problem. Now, the real problem comes in when you consider that we aren't really actually living in the first world anymore. We still have first world problems because you never, unfortunately, grow out of any stage, right? It's like the dimensions. You go from a dot to a line to a plane to a box to a tesseract, and then whatever comes next, right? But at the same time, a tesseract can comprehend a box, can comprehend a plane, can comprehend a line, can comprehend a dot. Because America was once a first world country, I still have first world problems because predominantly we are still a first world country, but we are also a post first world country. And what do I mean by that? I mean that we have gotten to the point, at some point in the last 30 years, we reached the pinnacle, the top, that sweet spot of as perfect a society as a society can get by when it is created by human beings. We got there. We reached it. Did that mean that all of our problems were solved? That we were living in a utopian society and that there were no poor people and no rich people and we all just got along? No, it didn't, because we're human beings and that's not how we work. There's always going to be somebody who takes advantage of somebody else, and there's always somebody who's going to be taken advantage of. It's very unfortunate, but it's true. That's just the reality of humanity, of temporality, of living in this mortal world. But we were pretty dang close. There were provisions put in place for people who were still living below the poverty line in the United States. And let's make it very clear, okay? The poverty line in the United States is still fairly first world. Okay, like maybe 1% of that lower 1% is truly heinously destitute. I mean, even those countries that we usually point fingers at and say that's the third world have, cell phones and electricity and water and infrastructure. They're mostly in the second world, and they're moving rapidly towards a first world. And I mean, it's just, but there are very few actual point to point comparisons that you can make for deep poverty and these advancing nations versus ours. Very little. Again, I'm not saying that it doesn't exist. I'm just saying that comparatively it is extremely small. Even our poverty people are still living pretty well by third world standards, okay? But when we hit that point, that sweet spot, that sing, there's only so far that you can progress before you start regressing. And that's what we're seeing now in this post first world. I'm just going to call it an apocalypse. We're in a post first world apocalypse right now, where we are slowly destroying ourselves as a society, though much less slowly since COVID. It's just been snowballing out of control, and it's this wild avalanche is going to consume everything. But because of that, we are moving towards a progressive regression, as if that's a good thing. We reached that point of inclusivity where everybody in America could be or do or live or say or whatever it was that they wanted. There were still problems, but we could address them as they came up. Maybe I'm looking on the past with rose-colored glasses, but I think the 90s and the millennium, like the 1990 to about 2010, when social media really started to just explode, was pretty sweet in America. I enjoyed growing up in America at that time. I had friends of all races and religions and creeds and ages, and we all got along just fine because we were all just people. And yet at some point in the last 5 years especially, but 20 years as a whole, we've started to go backward. We've started segregating ourselves as if that's a good thing. Now we have black only student unions, and we're drawing lines, we're dividing people, we're creating pockets of us and them. And I don't think the country has been this divisive since the civil rights movement. And people talk about, the civil rights movement as if it's, still ongoing. And in a way it is, but in reverse. I've said this before about feminism, where you had these women who were fighting for equality, and then they got equality, but that wasn't enough. Now it's not about being equal. Now it's about being above. It's about subjugating the others because at one point you were subjugated. Well, newsflash, every people, color, creed, country, sex, whatever, has been oppressed at some point, somewhere in this world. There is nobody who hasn't been trampled on in their history at some point. Not even white people, okay? This isn't helping. This isn't moving towards unity. It's moving away from it. We've stopped, interacting and intermingling, and we're starting to peel apart. And it's hurting everybody. That's what brings us to where we are in this post-first world, where we have post-first world problems. And what are post-first world problems? Post-first world problems are the problems that we are making for ourselves. And that includes things like gender ideology, this whole postmodern nonsense about you can choose whatever it is that you feel based off of how you feel in a given day, and to say that binary facts are not binary facts unless they are, because sometimes science is science and so other times science is subjective. And you can't have it both ways. The talk about toxic masculinity and white privilege and all of this just nonsense. We got to a point in our country where anybody could do whatever it was that they wanted. And now we're getting to a point where we are deliberately dumbing down our citizens and telling them that they cannot succeed because they are a victim in some way or another. It's all about control. And it's creating fissures. It is breaking us up. It is breaking us apart as a country, as a people, as humans, as human beings. And it's disgusting. And those are the problems I cannot abide. Because there's a difference between, dealing with problems that are first world problems that come with, the advancement of society, and creating problems deliberately to break down society for whatever end. There are people who are deliberately trying to create chaos for whatever purpose, whether, they have an end goal or if it's just chaos for the sake of chaos. I don't know. But I cannot abide post-first world problems because those aren't real problems. They are problems that we are creating, that we are deliberately manufacturing, that we are deliberately exacerbating, and we are giving voice to, and they don't need voices. They don't. All it's doing is creating confusion and chaos and hate, and it is perpetuating like a cycle, and it's being taught and incubated in children, and I won't stand for it. I won't. I will raise the post-first world to the ground if I have to, because I refuse to live there. I would much rather go back to the first world. I would much rather go back to the second world. I would much rather go back to the third world than to live in a post-first world society.